The steel hull groaned like a wounded animal, a low, vibrating sound that rattled the bunk above Lieutenant Kara Bishop's head. She opened her eyes in the darkness, the stale recycled air heavy in her lungs, the scent of oil, sweat, and metal suffocating her. The submarine had been submerged for 46 days in the North Atlantic, deeper than any classified mission had taken them before, and there was something about this depth, this darkness, that felt alive. She rolled out of her bunk, her boots striking the cold metal floor with a hollow thud that echoed far longer than it should have in the narrow passage. The red emergency lights painted the cramped corridor in blood, the shadows shifting strangely, as if something unseen moved just out of view. "Kara, you awake?" a voice whispered. It was Samuels, the youngest engineer on the USS Vesper, his eyes wide and bloodshot, dark circles sunk deep into his pale skin. "I haven't slept in days," he said, glancing nervously down the corridor as if expecting something to crawl from the shadows. "Neither have I," Kara admitted. "No one could. Not after the last sonar ping. 3 days ago, at precisely 0300, the sonar had returned an echo, something impossibly large moving beneath them, deeper than the trench itself. The crew had tried to rationalize it: thermal layers, underwater ridges, an unknown whale species. But they all felt it, the vibration, the deep, resonant hum that passed through the hull like a voice too low to hear, too ancient to comprehend. "Captain says it's nothing," Samuels continued, scratching at his forearm until the skin turned raw. "But it's out there, Kara. I can hear it at night. It's calling us." Before Kara could respond, the ship groaned again, louder this time, the walls shuddering as the deck beneath them seemed to dip, almost like something immense had brushed against the hull, testing it, tasting it. They both froze. The emergency lights flickered, shadows stretching across the corridor, dancing and twisting into shapes that did not belong to any human form. Kara's hand instinctively went to the cold steel of the railing, her knuckles white. "Did you feel that?" Samuels whispered, voice trembling. "I felt it," she replied, her breath fogging in the sudden cold that swept down the passage like a phantom tide. From somewhere deep within the sub, a clang echoed, metallic and hollow, like a hammer against the hull, but the sound was impossibly rhythmic, too deliberate to be an accident. 1, 2, 3. A knock. Kara's heart pounded so hard she thought it would crack her ribs. She looked into Samuel's terrified eyes and saw her own fear reflected back at her. The submarine fell silent again, but the silence was worse, filled with the memory of that knocking, filled with the certainty that whatever was out there, whatever was beneath them, wasn't done with them yet. Kara and Samuel stood in the silence, the hum of the submarine systems pressing into their ears like a heartbeat they couldn't escape. The lights flickered once more, casting long, jerking shadows over the pipes and cables that lined the ceiling. Kara tried to swallow, but her mouth was too dry, her tongue thick as cotton. "Let's go check it out," she said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. Samuel shook his head violently. "No. We should stay here. We should stay quiet." But Kara was already moving, her boots thumping against the grated steel floor as she made her way down the narrow corridor, deeper into the bowels of the USS Vesper. She could feel the vibrations beneath her feet, faint but unmistakable, as if the entire submarine was breathing. She passed the galley, the stale scent of canned food and old coffee lingering like a ghost in the air, the empty seats at the mess bolted to the floor, waiting for a crew that could no longer sit still. They were all afraid now. They were all hearing it. A distant scraping, sometimes from the outer hull, sometimes from the pipes within the walls, sometimes from just behind them when they turned away. It was as if the darkness of the deep had begun to bleed into the metal of the submarine itself. They reached the control room, where Captain Ellis stood hunched over the sonar console, the green glow casting harsh shadows on his weathered face. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now looked sunken, restless. "Kara," he said without looking up. "You felt it too, didn't you?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her eyes flicking to the sonar display. The green line swept in a slow, patient circle, and there, just on the edge of the screen, was a dark shape, massive and formless, drifting just beyond the range of their instruments. "We're deeper than we've ever been," Ellis said quietly, rubbing his temples. "But it's deeper still." There was a sudden bang from somewhere aft, like something striking the hull again, and the entire sub shuddered. The lights dimmed, then came back, weaker than before. Kara could hear the groan of metal straining, the creak of pipes expanding under the cold pressure of the deep. "Captain, what the hell is that?" Samuels burst out, his voice cracking. Ellis didn't answer. He was staring at the sonar, where the dark shape had moved closer, impossibly close, and yet there was no alarm, no collision warning, no indication of contact. It was as if the water itself had swallowed it, hidden it, allowed it to move unseen. "Captain?" Kara pressed. He looked up, eyes haunted. "Whatever it is, it's not leaving." A loud, screeching sound echoed through the hull, like claws dragging across steel, and Kara's blood turned to ice. She looked at the sonar again, but the shape was gone. The lights flickered again and went out entirely, plunging them into darkness. There was a moment of absolute silence, then a deep, resonant thud, as if something enormous had landed on the hull, settling on top of them. Then, in the darkness, they all heard it. A voice, so low it was almost a vibration, speaking words that were not words, calling out from the crushing darkness beyond the hull. Kara's knees went weak, and she pressed her hands to her ears, but it didn't stop the sound. She could feel it inside her skull, inside her bones, like something ancient and patient had finally found them. And it was hungry. The emergency lights sputtered back to life, bathing the control room in a dim red glow, but it felt worse than the darkness. The red made the sweat on their faces look like blood, and the shadows moved in strange, twitching patterns across the walls, mimicking motions no one made. Kara's ears still rang with that low, inhuman voice, even though the sound had stopped. She looked at Captain Ellis, whose lips were moving, whispering to himself words she couldn't hear, eyes wide, unblinking, locked on something only he could see. Samuels was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he pressed himself against the wall, whispering, "It's inside, it's inside, it's inside." The sub groaned again, deeper and longer than before, the metal stretching under the weight of the deep, or under the weight of something pressing against it from the outside. The vibration was constant now, not like the hum of the engines, but like a slow heartbeat in the steel, alive and deliberate. Suddenly, the sonar screen flickered and turned black, then blinked back on, showing the shape again, now right on top of them. It wasn't a shape anymore, it was a void, a perfect circle of darkness that swallowed the green of the sonar completely. A loud clang came from the hull, and then another, like something tapping, knocking in a rhythm that was almost like breathing. Knock. 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 The rhythm was slow, patient, like it wasn't in a hurry. Kara felt her breath coming in shallow gasps, her lungs unable to fill properly in the heavy air. She could see her breath fogging in front of her, the temperature dropping rapidly as if the deep itself was seeping into the submarine. Captain Ellis stood straighter, his eyes wide, staring into the air. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. Kara swallowed, her throat raw. "What is it, Captain?" "It's calling," he said, his voice distant. "It's been calling for a long time. We just weren't deep enough to hear it before." The lights flickered again, and in that brief moment of darkness, Kara saw something reflected in the glass of the sonar screen, a tall, thin figure with impossibly long arms, its head tilted, glowing eyes watching her from the reflection. She spun around, but there was nothing there. Only the shadows, stretching and shifting with the flickering light. A sudden lurch threw them all to the floor as the submarine dipped, the metal screaming in protest. The light strobed violently, and for a split second, Kara saw water leaking from the seams of the hatch, black and thick, almost like oil. Then the light steadied, and the leak was gone. But the knocking continued, now closer, as if it was coming from just outside the control room door. Knock. 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 Captain Ellis stood, moving toward the door with slow, mechanical steps. "It's here," he said softly. "Captain, don't," Kara started, but it was too late. His hand reached for the hatch wheel, fingers trembling as they gripped the cold steel. Kara scrambled to her feet, grabbing his arm. "Don't open it, sir. We're under pressure." But Ellis turned to her, and for a moment, Kara saw nothing human in his eyes, only a reflection of the deep, dark and endless. "It wants to come in," he said, and he began to turn the wheel. "No!" Kara screamed, grabbing the wheel to stop him, but Ellis's strength was inhuman, his fingers locked like iron around the cold steel as he forced it to turn. The metal creaked under their struggle, the sound echoing like a dying scream in the control room. "Help me!" Kara yelled at Samuels, who stood frozen, tears streaking his cheeks, shaking his head in denial. The knocking on the hatch became pounding now, heavy and relentless, like fists the size of the sea hammering on the thin steel barrier between them and the crushing dark. Boom. 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 The lights flickered again, and Kara saw, for just a moment, water seeping in around the edges of the hatch, black and cold, bringing with it a smell of salt and something fouler, older, like rot from the bottom of the ocean. Ellis turned the wheel with a final jerk, and the lock clicked open. The hatch exploded inward, a rush of freezing water slamming Kara backward, slamming her into the sonar console with bone-snapping force. The water was black, impossibly cold, swirling around her, pulling at her limbs as alarms began to scream, the lights going dark as the backup batteries were drowned. Through the chaos, Kara saw Captain Ellis standing, his mouth open in a silent scream as the water rose around him, something pulling him toward the open hatch. Long, black fingers, too thin, too many joints, reached from the water, wrapping around his arms, his neck, his head. And then he was gone, dragged into the blackness, the hatch yawning open like a mouth. The water was waist-deep now, the cold turning Kara's limbs to lead, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps as she pulled herself upright, slipping on the slick floor. Samuels was screaming now, a high, broken sound, trying to climb the shelves bolted to the wall, trying to escape the rising black tide. His eyes were wide, staring at the hatch, where shapes moved in the darkness. Tall, thin figures, with long arms and glowing eyes, stepping silently through the water as if it was not there. They moved like shadows, but their eyes were real, burning with a cold blue light that stabbed into Kara's mind, filling her head with whispers in a language she could not understand, but felt in her bones. She grabbed Samuels's arm, pulling him down from the shelves, dragging him through the water as the figures advanced, their movements slow and patient, like they knew there was nowhere to run. They stumbled out of the control room, the water following them, rising around their waists, their chests, dragging at their legs with every step. The submarine was tilting now, the groaning metal of the hull screaming under the impossible pressure, the lights flickering as sparks rained down from the broken wires above. Behind them, the figures followed, stepping through the water, silent and inevitable. Kara pulled Samuels into the corridor, slamming the emergency hatch closed behind them, twisting the wheel with frozen fingers until it locked, cutting off the water, for now. They collapsed against the wall, their breath ragged, the alarms still screaming around them. Samuels was sobbing, whispering, "It's here, it's here, it's here." Kara pressed her forehead to the cold metal wall, closing her eyes, the whispers still in her mind, the image of those glowing eyes burned into her vision. And beneath it all, she could still hear it. Knock. 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 Somewhere deeper in the submarine, in the darkness they could not escape. The screaming alarms died suddenly, leaving a suffocating silence in the corridor, broken only by the sound of water dripping from their soaked clothes and the distant, hollow creaks of the submarine's straining hull. Kara opened her eyes, blinking away tears she hadn't realized were falling. The emergency lights cast the hallway in pulsing red, illuminating the rivulets of black water seeping through the cracks at the bottom of the hatch they had just sealed. It wouldn't hold forever. Samuel slid down the wall, clutching his head, rocking back and forth. "We're dead, we're dead, we're dead." "No," Kara hissed, grabbing him by the shoulders, shaking him. "We are not dead, Samuels. Listen to me." His bloodshot eyes met hers, unfocused, pupils blown wide with terror. "We need to get to the engine room," she said, her voice low, steady despite the fear trying to claw up her throat. "If we can get to the emergency ballast controls, we can surface. If we get to the surface, we can signal for help." "They won't let us leave," Samuels whispered, eyes darting down the hallway. "They're inside now. I can hear them." Kara felt it too, a presence in the stale air, pressing against her mind like cold fingers. She forced herself to push it aside, to focus. "Help me up," she ordered, and after a moment, Samuels took her hand, pulling himself to his feet. They moved down the narrow corridor, the submarine groaning around them like a wounded beast. Pipes above them dripped condensation, and each drop sounded like a hammer in the silence. The deeper they moved, the colder it became, their breath visible in the dim red light. They passed crew quarters, empty bunks swinging slightly, wet footprints leading in strange, spiraling patterns along the floor, too large and too thin to be human. At one intersection, they heard movement, a soft sloshing, a faint scraping like nails against steel. Kara held up her hand, stopping Samuels. They pressed against the wall, barely breathing. Out of the shadows stepped one of the figures. It was tall, impossibly thin, its skin the color of deep ocean, slick and glistening, with limbs that bent in wrong angles. Its eyes glowed blue, burning in the darkness, and its head turned, scanning the corridor with slow, deliberate movements. Kara's heart pounded so hard she thought it would explode. She held her breath, willing herself to become invisible, to become part of the steel wall pressing into her back. The creature took a step forward, and the lights flickered. In that brief darkness, Kara heard it whisper, not in words, but in images that flooded her mind, the crushing blackness of the deep, the endless cold, the hunger. The lights returned, and the creature turned its head, looking directly at her. Samuel screamed. The creature lunged, moving impossibly fast, its long arms reaching out, fingers ending in claws like black coral. Kara grabbed Samuel's, pulling him down the corridor as the creature's claws scraped the wall, leaving deep gouges in the steel. They ran, the creature's footsteps silent behind them, the only sound their ragged breaths and the pounding of Kara's heart. She could feel it behind them, so close she could almost feel its cold presence on her neck. They rounded a corner, and Kara slammed her hand on the emergency hatch controls, the door sliding down just as the creature reached them, its clawed hand slipping through the gap, the tips of its fingers brushing against Kara's arm. She screamed as icy cold shot through her veins, a vision of black water and ancient ruins flashing in her mind, before the door slammed shut, severing the creature's fingers with a wet, cracking sound. Black ichor oozed from beneath the hatch, the severed fingers twitching on the floor before dissolving into puddles of dark liquid. Kara collapsed, clutching her arm where the creature had touched her, the skin cold and numb, black veins spreading slowly beneath the surface. Samuel stared at her, eyes wide with horror. "Kara, your arm." She looked down, seeing the black veins creeping up toward her shoulder, each pulse of her heartbeat sending them further. Kara clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stand. "We keep moving," she said, her voice shaking. "We keep moving." Because she knew if they stopped, the darkness would swallow them whole. They moved again, the emergency lights flickering as if each pulse of the failing power was counting down their remaining time. Kara could feel the numbness creeping further up her arm, black veins like cracks in marble snaking under her skin, pulsing with each beat of her racing heart. Samuels couldn't stop staring at it, his breath coming in short, terrified gasps. "Kara, it's inside you. Kara clenched her jaw. "It's not inside me. Not yet." But she wasn't sure she believed it. They reached a ladder leading down to the lower deck, where the engine room was located. The submarine groaned again, a shudder running through the metal beneath their feet, the walls creaking, the air filled with the scent of cold salt and something older, something rotten. Kara grabbed the ladder with her good hand, the cold steel burning against her skin, and began to descend, each rung echoing like a drumbeat in the narrow shaft. Samuels followed, his eyes darting around the shadows, flinching at every creak and groan. They reached the lower deck, the water here ankle-deep, swirling black and cold, the lights flickering, casting twisted shadows that moved like living things across the walls. The engine room doors stood at the end of the corridor, partially open, a faint blue light spilling out from within. As they moved toward it, Kara felt the cold creeping further into her body, the black veins now reaching her shoulder, a dull ache settling into her bones. She could hear the whispers again, calling from the deep, from the darkness, promising peace, silence, the end of fear if she would just let go. She shook her head, forcing herself to keep moving, focusing on the sloshing of the water, the hum of the emergency lights, the harsh sound of Samuel's breathing. They reached the engine room, pushing the doors open fully. Inside, the emergency ballast controls blinked with red warning lights, the systems damaged but not completely dead. The engines themselves were silent, hulking shapes in the darkness, dripping with condensation that hissed as it hit the glowing hot pipes. Samuels moved to the control panel, his hands shaking as he tried to remember the procedures. "We can purge the ballast tanks manually," he said, his voice trembling. "If we can force them open, we can surface." Kara nodded, moving to help him, ignoring the pain in her arm, the cold that was now reaching her chest. Each breath felt heavier, her vision occasionally blurring with flashes of black water and glowing blue eyes in the corners of her mind. Suddenly, the submarine shuddered violently, a deep, resonant boom echoing through the hull, followed by the sound of metal twisting, tearing, as if something massive had grabbed the submarine and was squeezing. The lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness, the emergency alarms blaring in the black. Kara activated her flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the dark, revealing the engine room now filling with mist, the cold even deeper, cutting to the bone. She could see her breath, thick clouds in the light, swirling strangely as if moved by an unseen wind. Then they heard it again. Knock. 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 This time, it wasn't from outside. It was coming from within the walls, moving, getting closer, each knock deliberate, patient, knowing there was nowhere left to run. Samuels whimpered, backing against the control panel. "They're inside, Kara. They're inside." Kara raised her flashlight, the beam trembling as it illuminated the far end of the engine room, where the mist was thickest. A shape moved within it. Tall, thin, its arms impossibly long, dragging across the floor, claws scraping against metal, leaving trails of black ichor that hissed as they touched the water. Its eyes opened, glowing blue, locking onto Kara. And then it spoke, not with words, but with that deep vibration that rattled her bones, filled her mind with darkness. "Come." The whisper was inside her head, inside the steel, inside the water, inside everything. The black veins in her arm pulsed violently, spreading down her side, across her chest, as the creature stepped forward, the mist swirling around it like a living cloak. Kara felt her knees go weak, the cold rushing through her body, the darkness flooding her mind, filling her with images of the deep, of the crushing darkness, of the hunger. But she clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stand, forcing herself to raise her flashlight, to face it. Because she would not go quietly into that darkness. Not yet. The creature stepped fully into the beam of Kara's flashlight, its skin glistening like wet obsidian, impossibly thin yet radiating a sense of crushing weight, like the deep itself had taken form. Its long arms dragged against the floor, each claw leaving burning trails of black ichor in the shallow water, steam rising where it touched. Its eyes glowed brighter, and Kara felt the vibration in her skull intensify, pressing against her mind like cold fingers trying to pry her thoughts apart. For a moment, her vision blurred, and she saw through its eyes, endless black water, pale lights flickering in the abyss, the cold silence of the deep that had waited patiently, hungry, for centuries. She stumbled backward, her boots splashing in the cold water, breath coming in sharp, freezing gasps. Her flashlight flickered, the beam cutting in and out, the creature's form appearing and disappearing with each blink, moving closer each time the light failed. Behind her, Samuels was screaming, hammering at the emergency ballast controls, trying to force the purge valves open. The alarms shrieked, the red lights blinking in random patterns, casting frantic shadows across the wet steel walls. The creature raised one long arm, pointing at Kara, its clawed hand shaking as if struggling to maintain its form. The black veins in Kara's arm pulsed in response, pain flaring through her body, dropping her to one knee as she let out a strangled cry. "Come," the vibration thundered in her skull again. "No," she screamed back, clutching her head, fighting the darkness that pressed against her mind, images of cold black water and ancient ruins flooding her vision. She forced herself to look up, locking eyes with the creature, its blue gaze boring into her soul. "I won't," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steady. Samuels let out a victorious shout as the ballast control levers snapped into position, the system groaning as the purge began, heavy bubbles thundering along the hull, the submarine shuddering violently as it started its slow ascent. The creature tilted its head, its eyes narrowing, and it let out a low, resonant sound that made the water around it ripple violently. Suddenly, it lunged. Kara rolled to the side as the creature's claws slammed into the floor where she had been, sending up a spray of scalding black water. She scrambled to her feet, slipping and crashing into a console, pain flaring in her shoulder, the black veins now pulsing with a sickening rhythm. The submarine groaned again, tilting as it rose, the water shifting, pulling at her legs. The creature was knocked sideways by the sudden motion, crashing into a wall with a wet, hollow sound. Kara saw her chance. She pushed off the console, charging at the creature with a broken pipe she grabbed from the floor, letting out a scream of rage and fear as she swung it with all her strength. The pipe connected with the creature's head, shattering into splinters on impact, black ichor spraying across the walls, sizzling as it hit the metal. The creature let out a deafening, low roar that vibrated through Kara's bones, but it stumbled, collapsing into the rising water, its form flickering like a dying flame. Samuels grabbed her arm, dragging her away as the creature writhed, the water now waist-deep, swirling with black trails of ichor. The submarine continued its violent ascent, metal groaning, the pressure shifting, alarms screaming in protest. "We have to get to the escape hatch." Kara shouted over the noise, the cold now deep in her chest, every breath a struggle as the black veins reached toward her heart. They stumbled out of the engine room, the creature's dying roar echoing behind them, the corridor shaking as the submarine fought its way upward, desperate for the surface, for the light, for air. They didn't look back as they climbed the ladder toward the escape chamber, the cold darkness behind them pressing closer, the whispers in Kara's mind growing fainter but not gone. They would not be safe yet. Not until they reached the surface. They climbed, rung after rung, their wet hands slipping on the cold steel, each breath burning in Kara's lungs as if she were inhaling the crushing depths themselves. The submarine was tilting violently now, groaning like a wounded leviathan as it clawed toward the surface. The emergency lights along the ladder flickered, casting frantic shadows that seemed to crawl alongside them, whispering from the darkness just beyond the reach of the dim red glow. Kara felt the black veins pulsing across her chest, each beat of her heart sending a wave of numbness through her arm and neck, her vision swimming with ghostly shapes, dark figures with glowing blue eyes, waiting in the cold water below. "Don't stop," she hissed to herself, forcing her legs to move, ignoring the pain, ignoring the voices, focusing only on the rungs in front of her. Samuels was just above her, his breath ragged, his boots clanging against the metal as he scrambled upward, glancing back with wide, terrified eyes. "Kara, it's coming," he shouted, his voice cracking. Below them, deep within the submarine's dark corridors, the knocking began again. Knock. 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 It was slower now, deliberate, echoing up through the steel, as if the creature was following, hunting, unhurried because it knew there was nowhere left for them to go. The submarine lurched again, throwing Kara against the ladder, the cold shock of pain in her shoulder forcing a scream from her lips. She nearly lost her grip, her boots slipping, but Samuels reached down, grabbing her wrist, pulling her upward with desperate strength. "We're almost there," he yelled, tears mixing with the spray of cold condensation dripping from the pipes above. They reached the top, the narrow shaft opening into the small escape chamber, the hatch to the outer world looming above them, sealed tight, the red indicator light blinking in the darkness. Kara slammed her palm against the control panel, the indicator flicking from red to amber as the system began to pressurize, preparing for emergency ascent. The submarine shook violently, bubbles roaring against the hull as it fought to surface faster, the ballast purge forcing the vessel upward like a dying breath. Behind them, the knocking turned into pounding, each impact ringing like a bell, getting closer, closer, the steel of the hatch below them denting inward with each strike. Boom. 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 Kara looked at Samuels, seeing her own fear mirrored in his eyes, but also a flicker of determination. The light above them turned green. She reached up, grabbing the release wheel with her numb hand, twisting it with all her strength, the black veins burning under her skin, sending waves of agony through her body. The hatch clicked. She pushed it upward, cold air rushing in like a scream, the scent of salt and freedom flooding the chamber. The pounding behind them turned into a roar, a final, furious sound that rattled the steel around them. Kara and Samuels pulled themselves through the hatch, emerging into the freezing night air, the black waves of the ocean crashing around the partially surfaced submarine, the cold wind tearing at their soaked clothes. They collapsed onto the hull, gasping, the cold air burning their lungs, the stars above impossibly bright in the dark sky, the moon hanging like a pale witness to their escape. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind and the waves, the submarine groaning beneath them, water rushing from its vents as it struggled to stay afloat. Then, from the open hatch below, a sound rose. A low, resonant hum, vibrating through the steel, rising into a scream that shattered the cold night. From the darkness of the hatch, a hand emerged, long and thin, black as the deep, claws scraping against the steel, pulling its impossible form toward the surface. Its blue eyes glowed in the darkness, locking onto Kara as she lay on the hull, too weak to move, too exhausted to fight. It was coming for them. And the ocean, silent and endless around them, watched. The creature's claws scraped against the steel of the submarine's hull, the sound shrill and metallic, cutting through the howl of the wind and the crash of the waves. It pulled itself further out of the hatch, its long, thin body unfolding like dark smoke, water cascading off its limbs in black, oily sheets. Its glowing blue eyes fixed on Kara as she lay gasping on the cold metal, the numbness in her veins now a heavy weight dragging at her heart, the black lines beneath her skin pulsing in sync with the creature's advance. Samuels crawled to her side, grabbing her shoulder. "Kara, we have to move." She tried to stand, but her legs refused, trembling and weak, the cold air like needles against her soaked clothes. The creature let out a low, vibrating sound that rattled the hull beneath them, its claws puncturing the steel as it crawled forward, each movement slow and deliberate, like it knew there was nowhere left to run. The submarine groaned, water rushing across the deck as another wave crashed over them, salt stinging Kara's eyes, blurring the vision of the creature as it pulled itself fully onto the hull, towering above them, its head tilting with unnatural grace. "You are mine." The words weren't spoken but carved into her mind, each syllable a pulse of cold agony that made the black veins flare with dark light, forcing a scream from her throat. The creature raised its hand, pointing at Kara, and the veins on her skin crawled toward it, stretching like black tendrils, reaching for the creature as if answering its call. "No," she gasped, grabbing at the dark lines, trying to pull them back, but they slipped through her fingers like liquid shadow, connecting her to the creature. Samuels grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away, but the black tendrils pulled back, dragging her toward the creature, her boots skidding across the wet steel. "Kara! Fight it!" he screamed, tears streaming down his face. She tried, every muscle in her body straining, the cold fire in her veins burning, the darkness in her mind pressing, promising silence, peace, the end of fear if she would just let go. The creature took another step, its claws digging deep into the steel, pulling it closer, its eyes glowing brighter, the wind whipping around it as if the storm itself was bowing to its presence. Kara looked up into its eyes, and for a moment, she saw everything. The black depths of the ocean, endless and cold, ancient cities in the dark, built by hands long dead, the creatures of the deep circling, waiting, the crushing silence of eternity beneath the waves. And at the center of it all, this creature, watching, waiting, calling. "Let go." The voice in her mind was almost gentle now. Kara's vision blurred, the edges of the world turning black, the cold consuming her from the inside. Then, through the darkness, she felt Samuel's hand, warm despite the cold, gripping hers with desperate strength. "Don't leave me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Please, Kara." The creature paused, tilting its head, as if confused. Kara looked at Samuel's, at the terror and the hope in his eyes, and something inside her pushed back against the darkness. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but growing stronger. "You don't own me." She reached down, grabbing the flare gun from Samuel's belt with her numb fingers, raising it with all the strength she had left, aiming directly at the creature's glowing eyes. The creature's claws lashed forward, but Kara pulled the trigger. The flare exploded in a burst of red light, blinding in the darkness, the hiss of burning phosphor mixing with the creature's scream, a sound so loud it shook the metal beneath them. The flare struck the creature's chest, embedding itself in the black flesh, burning bright, the flames spreading across its form, the shadows writhing and twisting as the creature staggered backward, clawing at the fire. It screamed again, a sound of rage and agony that pierced the storm, as the flames consumed it, the black tendrils retracting from Kara's skin, leaving behind dark scars but breaking the connection. Kara fell back, gasping, the numbness in her body receding, leaving behind a searing pain but also her mind, her own. The creature stumbled to the edge of the hull, burning, the flames reflected in its glowing eyes as it let out one final, echoing cry before falling backward into the black waves. There was a hiss of steam as the water swallowed it, the flames snuffed out in an instant, leaving only the crashing of the waves and the howling of the wind. Kara lay on the cold steel, staring up at the storm-torn sky, the rain washing over her, the red glow of the flare fading, leaving behind the cold darkness of the night. But it was her darkness now. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe. The rain pounded against the hull of the USS Vesper, washing away the last traces of black ichor, leaving streaks of rust and salt in its place. Kara's breath came in ragged gasps, the pain in her chest a reminder that she was alive, that she had fought, that she had won. For now. Beside her, Samuels collapsed, tears mixing with the rain on his face, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His eyes were wide, staring at the spot where the creature had fallen into the sea, the waves now calm, as if the ocean itself was pretending nothing had happened. Kara forced herself to sit up, every muscle screaming in protest, the black scars on her arm burning like brands. She looked at Samuels, reaching out to grip his shoulder, grounding him, grounding herself. "It's over," she said, though her voice was barely a whisper, and even as she spoke the words, she wasn't sure she believed them. Samuels looked at her, eyes haunted, but he nodded, clutching her hand like a lifeline. The submarine groaned beneath them, water rushing from the ballast tanks as it stabilized, the emergency lights flickering in the darkness, casting long shadows across the deck. Above them, the clouds parted for a moment, revealing the pale light of the moon, silver on the black waves, the storm breaking as if the world itself was taking a breath. Kara stood slowly, her legs unsteady, the cold wind cutting through her soaked clothes, but she didn't care. She walked to the edge of the hull, looking out over the endless ocean, searching the waves for any sign of movement, any hint of glowing blue eyes beneath the surface. There was nothing. Only the gentle rise and fall of the sea, the quiet after the storm. Samuels joined her, wrapping his arms around himself, shivering from more than just the cold. "What was it?" he asked, his voice small in the vast darkness. Kara shook her head, the memories of the creature's mind, the visions of the deep, the ruins in the black, the whispers of the cold pressing against her thoughts. "Something old," she said finally. "Something that should have stayed buried." Samuels didn't respond, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the wind whipping around them, the ocean breathing beneath the hull. Then, from the distance, a light appeared on the horizon. A searchlight. A ship. Rescue. Kara felt a sob escape her lips, tears she didn't know she still had streaming down her face as the light grew closer, brighter, a promise of warmth, of safety, of life. She raised her arm, waving, the black scars on her skin catching the moonlight, a reminder of what they had survived, of what they had left behind in the deep. The ship drew closer, the lights illuminating the battered hull of the USS Vesper, the crew on deck shouting, throwing ropes, preparing to pull them to safety. Kara turned to Samuels, a tired smile on her lips. "We're going home," she said. But as the ropes were thrown and hands reached out to pull them from the cold steel, as the warmth of the rescue lights enveloped them, Kara felt a chill deep inside her, in the place where the darkness had touched her, where the black veins had pulsed with cold fire. And in the quiet of her mind, beneath the sound of the waves and the wind and the shouting of the rescuers, she heard it. Knock. Just once. But it was enough. Because she knew. It wasn't over. The deep never let go. They pulled Kara and Samuels aboard the rescue ship, warm blankets wrapping around their soaked, trembling bodies, the floodlights on deck blinding after the endless darkness of the deep. Voices swirled around them, medics, crew, shouting over radios, calling for hot water and medical kits. But Kara heard none of it. She sat on the deck, staring back at the black silhouette of the USS Vesper, half submerged, waves lapping against its scarred hull under the pale moonlight. The submarine looked dead, a carcass of rust and steel left to drift on the surface after something inside had been awakened and fed. Kara's hand twitched under the blanket, the black scars on her arm hidden beneath the fabric. They burned softly, a cold ache that pulsed with her heartbeat. She could feel the deep, even here, even now, like a whisper at the edge of her hearing. Samuels was kneeling a few feet away, vomiting seawater onto the deck, his body racked with shivers. Medics tried to pull him away, but he clung to the railing, his eyes fixed on the dark water, wide and unblinking. "They're still there," he whispered, his voice hoarse. The medics exchanged worried glances, assuming he was in shock. Kara knew better. They were still there. And they were watching. They were taken below deck, given warm drinks, dry clothes, wrapped in thermal blankets. The hum of the rescue ship's engines was a comforting, living sound compared to the cold, oppressive silence of the submarine. But even in the warmth, Kara couldn't stop shivering. In the small cabin they were given to rest, Kara washed the salt from her skin, scrubbing at the black scars until the skin was raw and bleeding, but the marks remained, like ink burned into her veins. When she looked in the mirror, she saw the darkness behind her eyes, the reflection flickering, for just a second, with a pair of cold, blue lights in the pupils. She squeezed her eyes shut, gripping the sink until her knuckles turned white. "You're not real," she whispered. But in the silence, she heard the faintest sound. Knock. That night, as the rescue ship cut through calm waters under a starless sky, Kara woke with a gasp, her skin clammy, the taste of salt in her mouth. She sat up in the bunk, the darkness pressing around her, the only light the faint glow of the emergency lamp in the corner. She could hear it again. Soft, deliberate. Knock. from the steel walls of the ship, as if the deep had reached up, following her to the surface. She pressed her hand against the wall, feeling the cold vibration pass through her palm, into her veins, into her mind. Images flooded her vision: black water, endless ruins beneath the sea, shadows moving with glowing eyes, waiting, watching, calling. Samuels was awake too, sitting in the corner of the cabin, knees pulled to his chest, rocking back and forth, his eyes locked on the floor. "They're calling us back," he whispered, his voice flat, empty. "No," Kara said, but her voice cracked, weak. "They never let go, Kara," Samuel said, looking up, and in his eyes, for a brief moment, she saw the reflection of blue light, cold and endless. She stumbled back, shaking her head. "No," she repeated, her breath coming in short gasps. She could hear it, louder now. Knock. Knock. The ship's lights flickered. Outside, the calm sea was dark, the surface like black glass, hiding what moved beneath. Kara pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the cold, slow pulse of the darkness inside her. She realized then the truth. They hadn't escaped the deep. They had brought the deep with them. And it was waking up. They reached the coast at dawn, the rescue ship docking at a small naval facility shrouded in early morning fog. Kara and Samuels were led down the gangway, their boots striking the metal steps in the gray quiet, the salt of the ocean still heavy in the air. Uniformed officers and medics met them, ushering them into a sterile building that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. They were questioned, examined, their blood drawn under the harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. Kara answered mechanically, recounting what she could. About the mission, the depth, the sonar echo, the darkness, the knocking. But she kept the worst of it hidden, the black veins beneath her skin, the whispers at the edge of her mind, the vision of glowing blue eyes in the deep. Some things were too dangerous to share. That night, they were given bunks in a secure wing of the facility, meant for observation. A nurse checked their vitals, left them with a plastic cup of water, and locked the door. The room was small, the air heavy, the single window showing only fog and the faint orange glow of a distant street lamp. Kara sat on the edge of the bunk, staring at her hands, at the dark scars that ran along her veins like old ink stains. They pulsed softly in the dim light, a cold throb that matched her heartbeat. Samuels lay on the other bunk, eyes wide open, unblinking, fixed on the ceiling. "They're waiting," he whispered. "Don't," Kara said, her voice hoarse. Samuel slowly turned his head to look at her, his eyes empty, hollow. "They're here, Kara." That night, Kara woke to a sound. Knock. Soft, deliberate, coming from the wall beside her head. She held her breath, listening. Knock. Knock. Samuel sat up, his face pale, eyes unfocused. "They're calling." Kara swung her legs off the bunk, standing, her bare feet cold on the linoleum floor. She pressed her hand to the wall, feeling a faint vibration, like a heartbeat in steel. Suddenly, the overhead light flickered, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. In the silence, they both heard it. A low, resonant hum, vibrating in the walls, the floor, the air. The fog outside the window thickened, pressing against the glass, shapes moving within it, tall, thin, shifting. The emergency light above the door flickered on, casting the room in a dim red glow. And on the window, a handprint appeared. Long fingers, too thin, too many joints, pressing against the glass, leaving streaks of black ichor that dripped slowly, staining the pane. Kara stumbled back, her breath coming in short gasps, the cold in her veins flaring like ice. From outside the window, a pair of glowing blue eyes opened in the fog, locking onto hers. "Come." The word wasn't spoken aloud, but it thundered in her mind, shaking her bones, vibrating the scars on her skin. Samuel screamed, falling to his knees, clutching his head. The hand on the window slid down, leaving a trail of black, before pulling away, disappearing into the fog. But the eyes remained, watching. Waiting. Calling. Kara fell to her knees beside Samuel's, grabbing his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. We're not going back. Do you hear me?" Samuel's eyes were wild, tears streaming down his face, but he nodded, gasping. Outside the window, the eyes blinked once, slowly, before fading into the fog. The humming stopped. The silence returned, heavy and cold. But they both knew it wasn't over. Because the deep was here now, with them, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what it had touched. They released Kara and Samuel's 2 days later. The doctor said the tests were clear, no infection, no toxins, nothing in their blood except stress markers and dehydration. The black scars on Kara's arm were dismissed as chemical burns from the engine room, nothing more. They were sent home with instructions to rest and hydrate, and a card for a counselor specializing in post-traumatic readjustment. But Kara knew. The doctors hadn't heard the knocking. They hadn't seen the blue eyes in the fog. Kara returned to her small apartment near the docks, the smell of salt and rust always in the air, the cries of gulls mixing with the distant groan of ships shifting in their berths. The familiarity should have comforted her, but everything felt wrong now. The shadows in the corners seemed to move when she wasn't looking. The pipes in the walls groaned at night with a rhythm that made her skin crawl. The sink dripped slowly, each drop echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. Knock. She would hear it sometimes, just before she fell asleep. A soft sound from the walls, or the window, or the pipes beneath the floorboards. Never loud, never urgent. Just patient. Samuels called her one night, his voice shaking. "I can't sleep," he whispered. "I know," Kara replied, staring out her window at the fog rolling in from the sea. "It's in the water," Samuel said. "I can hear it. The sink, the shower, the drains. It's whispering." Kara closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her scars. "Don't listen." "I can't stop," he whispered, and the line went dead. Kara began to notice changes. When she showered, the water would sometimes turn cold, almost painfully so, no matter how she turned the tap. In the mirror, for a split second, she would see her reflection blink with blue eyes before returning to normal. She stopped using the sink at night because she could see something moving in the drain, something black and slick, shifting just out of sight. When it rained, she would smell salt on the air, thick and sharp, and sometimes she could hear it, faint, almost too low to perceive. Knock. Knock. One morning, she woke to find black water pooled around the drain in her kitchen sink, staining the porcelain like ink. She stared at it for a long time, the surface rippling as if something beneath it had moved. Slowly, a shape rose just below the surface, pressing upward, a hand, thin, with too many joints, fingertips brushing against the surface, reaching. Kara backed away, her breath catching, until the hand slowly receded, dissolving into the black water, which then drained away, leaving no trace. That night, she dreamed of the deep. She stood on the deck of the USS Vesper as it sank into the black water, the cold rising around her legs, her waist, her chest, pulling her down. The sky was empty, no stars, no moon, just darkness above and darkness below. From the water, shapes rose, tall, thin, with glowing blue eyes, reaching for her with long, clawed hands. They whispered in a language she could not understand, but she felt the meaning in her bones. Return. She woke screaming, clutching her arm, the scars burning cold, pulsing like a second heartbeat. The next day, she found salt stains on her floor where her bare feet had stepped in the night, leading from her bed to the bathroom and back, even though she had not left the bed. Or so she thought. She began to understand. The deep had touched her. And it was calling her back. Kara stopped going outside. The world beyond her window became a blur of fog and rain, the smell of salt ever present, even when the sea was miles away. She kept the lights on at all times, afraid of what moved in the shadows when darkness crept in. But the lights could not keep the deep away. At night, she heard it knock. Soft, patient, coming from the pipes beneath the floor, from the walls, from the drains. Sometimes, she would catch glimpses of them, thin shadows moving across the hallway, slipping just out of sight when she turned her head, leaving wet footprints on the floor that dried into white salt stains. The black scars on her arm pulsed, the cold in her veins deepening, spreading to her chest, each heartbeat slowing as if the deep was reclaiming her pulse. Kara tried to fight it. She turned on every faucet, every shower, letting the water run until it was scalding hot, trying to drown out the cold that crawled into her bones. She scrubbed the salt from her floors, only to find it reappearing the next morning, shaped like footprints leading to her bed. She closed every drain, taped them shut, but woke to find the tape peeled back, the drains open, the faint scent of the ocean seeping into her room. The dreams worsened. She was back on the deck of the Vesper, standing in ankle-deep black water, the ocean around her endless and silent. The figures with glowing blue eyes surrounded her, whispering in a language of bubbles and darkness. They raised their hands, pointing to her, and the black veins in her skin would glow faintly, pulsing in time with the whispers. Return. One night, she awoke to the sound of water dripping. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening. Drip. 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 She turned on the light and saw it, a trail of black water leading from the bathroom to her bed, each drop spreading out like an ink blot on the wooden floor, evaporating into white salt as she watched. She followed the trail, her feet cold against the wet floor, her breath catching as she reached the bathroom. The sink was full of black water, swirling slowly, the surface rippling as if something beneath was moving, waiting. Kara's hand moved without her will, reaching toward the water, the black scars on her arm glowing softly, the cold intensifying until her breath came out as fog. She tried to stop, to pull back, but her fingers dipped into the water, and the world vanished. She was underwater, the crushing pressure of the deep pressing against her skin, the cold absolute, her breath torn from her lungs as she sank deeper, the darkness swallowing her whole. Shapes moved around her, glowing blue eyes watching from the black, their hands reaching, brushing against her skin, leaving trails of cold fire where they touched. She opened her mouth to scream, but only bubbles escaped, rising slowly before vanishing into the dark. And in the silence, she heard them. Return. She woke on the bathroom floor, drenched in cold sweat, her clothes soaked, the black water gone from the sink, leaving only a ring of salt around the drain. The scars on her arm glowed softly in the dark, fading as the dawn light crept into the room. Kara crawled to the window, pulling herself up to look outside. The fog was thick, rolling in from the sea, swallowing the world, turning the street into a corridor of gray silence. In the fog, she saw them. Tall, thin figures, moving slowly, their blue eyes glowing softly as they drifted through the mist, leaving trails of wet footprints on the pavement that steamed and hissed as they evaporated. They stopped, turning to look up at her window, their eyes locking with hers. They raised their hands, pointing. And she heard it again, louder now, vibrating in her bones. Knock. Knock. She fell back, clutching her chest, the cold inside her spreading, her vision darkening at the edges. She knew she could not run. The deep had claimed her. And it was time to return. Kara spent the day packing. Not clothes, not food, not the keepsakes she once thought made her who she was. Just silence, and the salt-heavy air, and the relentless, cold calm that had settled into her chest. Every time she paused, she could hear it. Knock. Knock. Sometimes from the pipes. Sometimes from the walls. Sometimes from inside her mind. That night, the fog was so thick she could barely see the end of the streetlights turning the mist into glowing orbs that seemed to hover, watching. She left her apartment without looking back, the scars on her arm glowing softly beneath her sleeve, pulsing like a quiet drumbeat guiding her steps. The world was silent, the fog swallowing all sounds except the faint echo of her boots on the wet pavement. She reached the docks just before dawn. The ocean was still, a black mirror reflecting the dim glow of the lights on the pier. The fog hung over the water, swirling slowly, hiding shapes within it that moved with unnatural grace. They were waiting for her. Tall, thin silhouettes, their blue eyes glowing softly in the mist, hands raised, pointing toward the sea. Toward home. Return. The word vibrated through her, a promise, a command, a quiet inevitability. She stepped forward, boots splashing in the shallow water that lapped against the edge of the pier. The cold seeped into her bones, but she felt no pain, only relief. She walked until the water reached her knees, then her waist, then her chest, the cold stealing her breath, but she did not stop. The figures in the mist watched silently, their eyes burning brighter as she moved closer, closer, until the water closed over her head. For a moment, there was panic, the instinct to kick, to reach for the surface, to gasp for air. But she forced herself to be still. To let the deep take her. The water around her darkened, the light from the surface fading, the cold pressing against her from all sides. Shapes moved around her, the glowing eyes drifting in the darkness, hands brushing against her skin, welcoming her home. She opened her mouth, letting the last of her breath escape in a stream of bubbles that rose slowly before disappearing into the dark. And then she saw it. Below her, an ancient ruin on the ocean floor, black stone pillars reaching upward like the bones of the earth, faint blue lights glowing between them, the cold silence of eternity waiting. They were there, the watchers, the dwellers of the deep, gathered around the ruins, their eyes fixed on her. They raised their hands. And she felt it, the cold, the silence, the endless depth that would swallow her whole and make her part of it forever. She felt the last warmth in her chest flicker and die. But in that final moment, a memory broke through the dark. Samuel's, reaching for her in the engine room. The warmth of his hand. His voice, shaking but alive, whispering, "Don't leave me." Something inside her ignited, small but bright, a defiance that pushed back against the cold. "No." The word echoed in the deep, vibrating through the ruins, through the watchers, through the darkness. She kicked, her body screaming as she forced herself upward, the watchers reaching for her, their hands brushing against her legs, pulling, begging. But she kept kicking. Toward the surface. Toward the light. Toward the air. She broke the surface with a gasp, the cold air burning her lungs as she coughed and choked, the dawn light breaking through the fog, turning the world pink and gold. The figures in the mist screamed silently, their shapes dissolving in the rising light, the glowing blue eyes winking out one by one. Kara floated on her back, staring at the sky, tears mixing with the salt water on her face. She was alive. And for now, that was enough. They found her washed up on the rocks near the pier at sunrise, skin pale, lips blue, her soaked clothes clinging to her thin frame like seaweed. The fisherman who found her said she looked dead, her eyes open, staring blankly at the sky, the waves lapping gently against her legs. But when they touched her shoulder, she gasped, water spilling from her mouth, and she began to cough, dragging in ragged breaths of cold, salt-laden air. Alive. They took her to the hospital, wrapped her in blankets, warmed her with heated air, but the cold in her veins remained, deep and quiet. When they asked what happened, she only said, "I went too deep." They stopped asking after that. In the sterile hospital room, she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, the hiss of oxygen through plastic tubes. But beneath it all, she could still hear it. Knock. Soft. Patient. Sometimes in the pipes behind the walls. Sometimes in the rhythm of the heart monitor. Sometimes in the silence of her own heartbeat. They told her she was lucky to be alive. They told her she could go home. They gave her medication, told her it would help with the nightmares. They didn't understand. They couldn't. The day she left the hospital, the fog rolled in heavy over the harbor, swallowing the world in gray. She stood for a long time at the edge of the water, the cold wind blowing her hair across her face, the scent of salt sharp in her lungs. She looked down at her arm, at the black scars that never faded, pulsing softly, a reminder of the deep that had touched her. She closed her eyes, listening. In the crash of the waves, in the hiss of the wind, in the silence of her own mind, she heard it. Return. But she opened her eyes, stepping back from the edge. Not today. She turned, walking away from the water, the fog closing behind her, hiding the sea from view. The deep would wait. It always did. And one day, she knew, she would return. But not today. Today, she would live.